A few years ago, when I was home from college during the summer, I decided to babysit to earn some extra money. I took care of two kids named Noah and Oliver who lived in the neighborhood next to mine, so it was a short and easy drive for me. Their parents were away for the weekend, so I was going to stay overnight at their house. My responsibilities included playing games with them, making them dinner, and getting them ready for bed. These kids were really well behaved and never caused any problems, which made it an ideal babysitting job. It was around 9 p.m. when we finished playing a game called Mario Party on the Nintendo Switch. As I began to prepare the kids for bed, a thunderstorm started outside. The rain was pouring heavily, and the kids, who were only 7 years old, looked scared because of the flashing lightning outside their bedroom window. I calmly told them not to worry because storms are natural and good for the earth. I spent a few more minutes comforting them and then let them know that if they needed anything or felt scared, I would be downstairs in the living room. This made the kids feel better, so I closed their door and said goodnight. About an hour later, while I was downstairs in the living room watching a Netflix documentary, the rain was pounding harder than ever. Noah, holding his blanket and looking scared, came into the room. I paused the show, stood up, and crouched down to his level. I asked him with wide eyes what was wrong. He told me that the boogeyman was outside his window. I reassured him that there was no boogeyman outside his window. It was just the thunder and lightning playing tricks on him, and he didn't need to worry. I encouraged him to go back upstairs and be a strong and brave brother for Oliver. I reminded him once again that I would be downstairs if he needed me and assured him that I would keep them safe. Noah reluctantly nodded and went back upstairs. At that moment, I couldn't help but feel a little guilty for not taking his concerns more seriously. I remembered being their age and how I used to believe every shadow at night was a monster, especially during thunderstorms. About 10 minutes passed, and I had resumed watching my documentary when Noah came back into the living room. This time, his eyes were red, and tears streamed down his face. I hurried over to him, comforting him by rubbing his shoulders and asking what was wrong. And he said again, "The boogeyman is outside their window." In order to truly ease his fears, I knew I needed to go upstairs and prove that there was no boogeyman. I took his hand, and together we climbed the stairs. When we reached the bedroom where the children slept, I saw Oliver huddled up in her blankets, trembling on her bed. I entered the room and reassured her that I was there and nothing bad was going to happen. It was just a thunderstorm outside, nothing more. While I tried to calm down Oliver, Noah tugged at my arm and pointed outside his bedroom window. There was a big tree and Noah told me to look at the branches. It was hard to see clearly because of the heavy rain, and I was about to explain that branches can look scary during storms when a bright flash of lightning lit up the sky. In that moment, I could see something clearly in the tree. Perched on the top branch, closest to their window, was a man. He didn't have a shirt on, his eyes were wide open, and he had the biggest smile I had ever seen. When our eyes met, he pointed at me. Noah and Oliver started crying too, as they could also see the man. I had to blink hard because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. But when I opened my eyes again, the man was still there, crouched in the tree, still staring and smiling. I immediately ran downstairs and made sure all the doors and windows were locked. I sprinted back upstairs, grabbed the kids, and locked them in the bathroom. I took out my cell phone and dialed 911 for help. While I was explaining the situation to the operator, I went back to the kids' room. Another flash of lightning illuminated the sky, and I could see that the man was no longer in the tree. 2 police cars arrived at the scene, even though it was pouring rain. They searched the entire property for the man, and I was really thankful for their help. After 20 minutes of searching outside, the officers came back inside, drenched from the rain. The main officer said they didn't find anyone, but they did find something. They discovered marks and broken branches on the tree right outside the children's bedroom. It showed that someone had been in the tree. They also found a rope wrapped in duct tape, and that part still gives me chills. The police were really helpful and offered to station an officer outside the house for the rest of the night to make sure we were all safe. Once everything calmed down, I apologized sincerely to Noah and Oliver for not believing them. They forgave me and said they were glad I was their babysitter. Thankfully, nothing like this has happened to me since. I still babysit sometimes when I need extra money, but now if a child tells me there's a boogeyman outside their window, I believe them. Take care and stay safe. Back in 2021, my parents went away for the weekend to celebrate their 18th wedding anniversary. I was their only child, a boy, and was 17 years old at the time. My parents told me to take care of the house while they were gone, and strictly forbade me from having any friends over. But being young and foolish, as soon as they left, I called my girlfriend and invited her to come over for the weekend. My girlfriend and I enjoyed smoking marijuana, also known as weed. When she arrived that night around 6 p.m., the first thing we did was roll a joint in my living room. Then we went out to the wooded area behind my house to smoke. Just to give you an idea of the location, we lived in a pretty rural area with lots of trees and hills in our backyard. Our closest neighbors were about half a mile away. Anyway, let's continue the story. We walked a bit into the woods and started smoking and leaned against tall trees and enjoyed the view. Suddenly, a few raindrops fell on my head, and I looked up. I realized there would be a thunderstorm soon. I was about to tell my girlfriend when she shushed me. She was staring into the vastness of the woods, tilting her head and squinting her eyes. I asked her what was wrong, and she said she thought she saw someone watching us. I laughed because we lived in a rural area, and it was unlikely to see anyone, especially in the woods during an approaching storm. I told her it was just the effects of the weed. I suggested we go back inside before we got drenched. By the time we got back into my house, there were huge crashes of thunder, and the rain had started pounding on the house. We both decided to get into more comfortable clothes for the night, and to watch a scary movie. And I think we chose The Exorcist, and we were probably halfway through when my girlfriend went to the kitchen to get some water. The kitchen looks out onto our backyard woods. Suddenly, I heard her scream and quickly ran into the kitchen, worried, and asked her what was wrong. She was standing by the big window, pointing outside. She said she saw the same person from earlier standing right in front of the window, looking inside. I have to admit, I got a little nervous this time. It was just the two of us in our isolated house during a thunderstorm. I looked outside and tried to see through the wind and rain, but it was difficult. However, I didn't see anything. I reassured her that the house was locked, and there was no way for anyone to get in. I told her that maybe she was still feeling the effects of the weed and imagining things. She wasn't completely convinced, but she agreed to go back to the living room and finish the movie. However, we were both so tired that we couldn't even finish watching it. Within 20 minutes of being back on the couch, we both fell asleep. I'm not sure how much later it was, but it must have been several hours into the night. I suddenly woke up and noticed the TV was still on. My girlfriend was fast asleep next to me. It wasn't the TV or her light snoring that woke me up, it was a jiggling noise. I got up and looked out of the windows in my living room. The rain was still pouring and the storm was as intense as ever. I thought maybe it was just the sound of the rain that woke me up. I was willing to believe that until I glanced over at my front door and saw the handle shaking from left to right. I was filled with horror when I realized someone was trying to enter my house. I went back to the living room window and tried to see if I could spot anyone near the front door. Suddenly, a flash of lightning lit up the area, revealing a man standing at my front door, attempting to pick the lock. I heard a clicking sound, and the front door began to slowly open. In that moment, I did the only thing that came to mind. I screamed loudly, pretending I had a gun and threatening to shoot if they stepped inside. As the door continued to slowly open, rain started pouring in and wetting everything. I cautiously approached the door and peeked outside. I could see the man running down my driveway into the dark night, disappearing into the woods. I quickly shut the door, locked it again, and placed chairs and desks in front of it for extra protection. By the time my girlfriend woke up from my screaming and was already on the phone with 911. It took about half an hour for the police officer to arrive. When the officer came, he shared some important news with us. He said there had been a series of break-ins in the area in the past few days. They hadn't caught the person responsible yet, but our break-in matched the same pattern. The suspect was targeting people's front doors and stealing from their homes. After I finished giving my statement and the officer left, I apologized to my girlfriend for not believing her earlier. She was right all along. There was a man out there who had been stalking us and waiting for an opportunity to break in. Since I was under 18 years old, my parents needed to be informed, and they found out that I had my girlfriend over despite promising not to. I believe the incident of almost getting robbed and defending the house made my parents less upset with me, which was a relief. As far as I know, that guy was never caught, or at least nobody informed me about it. When I was 15 years old, I wanted to make some extra money on the weekends, so I started dog sitting. I would take care of dogs for my neighbors, my family, and anyone who paid me fairly. One weekend, a wealthy family called the Mason asked me to watch their husky named Coco. The Mason were really rich, with fancy cars and a huge 6-bathroom house. When Mr. Mason asked me to take care of Coco for the weekend, I quickly agreed because I knew they would pay me well and give me a good tip. They were going away until Sunday afternoon, so they gave me a list of instructions for taking care of Coco. They also gave me $40 for dinner and told me to stay overnight at their house because they didn't want Coco to be alone. So the story really begins on that Friday night, my first night staying at the Mason's house. Coco, the dog I was taking care of, seemed like a really good dog. He listened to commands, didn't go crazy, and enjoyed cuddling. It was an easy way to earn money, in my opinion. When I returned inside the Mason's house after taking Coco for his last walk before bedtime, a thunderstorm started with lightning flashing across the sky. I felt lucky that I had finished the walk just in time, or else I would have gotten completely drenched. After giving Coco a treat for being a good boy, I followed Mr. Mason's instructions and put him in his cage in the kitchen. Once I made sure the cage was locked and secure, I said goodnight to the dog and went to the living room. I think it was around midnight when I started to fall asleep. The Mason had a huge 80-inch TV in their living room, and I took full advantage of watching a horror movie on AMC. That night, I fell into a peaceful sleep, partly because of the intense thunderstorm outside. However, at 2 a.m., I suddenly woke up with a strange feeling. You know that feeling when something just doesn't seem right. It's like those moments in a suspenseful movie when the main character has a gut feeling that something bad is about to happen and tries to stay away from it. That's exactly how I felt at that moment. Something was off, and the house was pretty dark because most of the lights were turned off before I had fallen asleep on the couch. I walked towards the front windows and looked outside. The rain was still pouring heavily. I scanned the living room, but everything seemed normal and untouched. That's when I decided to go check on Coco. As I made my way to the kitchen, something caught my attention. I noticed wet footprints leading directly towards it. At that moment, I realized I had two options. I could panic and put myself in danger, or I could stay calm and think logically. Logic told me that maybe those footprints were mine from earlier, but I remembered it wasn't raining when Coco and I returned from our last walk. Moreover, the footprints seemed fresh, as if someone had just made them minutes ago. Against my better judgment, I decided to follow them. As I reached the kitchen entrance, I could hear muffled sounds of scuffling and pleading. It was Coco, sounding upset. I fumbled around for the light switch and turned it on. What I saw was unbelievable. Coco was out of his cage, with his mouth duct-taped shut and his paws tied together. There was a man wearing a soaked raincoat trying to force Coco into a large open bag. The shock of me turning on the lights caused the man to spin around and notice me standing at the edge of the kitchen. Without thinking, I quickly grabbed a kitchen knife from the nearby knife block set. I held the knife in my trembling hand and firmly told the man to stay away from the dog. His face was mostly hidden by the hood of his raincoat, making it hard to see him clearly. However, he raised his hands and slowly backed away. I reached into my pocket to grab my cell phone and call 911. As soon as the man noticed my intentions, he swiftly passed me, darting through the living room and towards the front door. I followed closely behind him, observing as he sprinted through the pouring rain and reached a white van parked across the street. He quickly started the van and sped away. I unlocked the front door, dialed 911, and began freeing Coco from the ropes and duct tape. When the police arrived, they informed me that the Mason had security cameras all over their property. They were able to identify the license plate of the van the man was driving. Now, here comes the crazy part. The intruder's name was Aaron, and he turned out to be a former employee of Mr. Mason. Aaron believed he was unfairly fired and sought revenge by breaking into the Mason house, intending to steal their dog and demand a ransom. Unfortunately for Aaron, he didn't expect me to be dog-sitting that night, which foiled his plans. As a result, he ended up serving a 4-year prison sentence for breaking and entering and attempting to kidnap an animal. When Mr. Mason found out that I had stopped the kidnapping, he gave me the largest tip I've ever received, and it remains the biggest one to this day. I guess the lesson from this story is to trust your instincts when you have a feeling that something is wrong. It's a basic instinct we have to protect ourselves and stay safe in this world. So remember to listen to that inner voice and stay vigilant for your own well-being.